There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Okay, so this is going to be lesson 12 of the book Be Counted. It's the last part of Numbers 30 through 35. Now, for Jeannie's benefit and for those who weren't here, and for my benefit with my memory as it is now, I'll remind us that last week in lesson 11, we covered Numbers 26 through 29 and 36. So a lot of chapters. And in those chapters, God displayed his loving forgiveness because he moved past the Israelites' sin, their Baal Peor, and spent his energy preparing them for their promised land through many ways that would have been very comforting to the people, the Israelites, because he had them number the soldiers. And by giving inheritance laws for how things would be inherited in that conquered land when they don't actually own the land and not just be wandering around. And then they assigned a successor to Moses, who was Joshua. And then he guided them on how they're supposed to worship him once they're in the promised land. Today in lesson 12, we're going to study 6 chapters, 30 through 35. And I think we're going to have to, in the interest of time, I'm going to be summarizing some of those, of the more repetitive ones, but in them, we're going to learn a lot because we're going to learn about the sanctity of our words and how important it is to, when you give your word, to keep it. The victory of faith. It was through faith that they have victory over the Midianites, as we'll see. The loyalty of people to one another, how important it was that all the tribes hold together, even if some were going to stay on the other side of the Jordan. And then the sovereignty of our Lord God. And finally, the certainty of the inheritance that's coming for them and for us. Well, after 40 years of nomadic life, here's Israel ready to conquer, in their minds, ready to conquer and settle that land. But they're not quite ready because during these final chapters, along with the entire book of Deuteronomy, God calls them through Moses to take a pause and get prepared. There's nothing like being prepared and planning before going and doing something. And that's what God does for them. Israel's success as a holy nation was going to depend upon following that guidance God is giving them here and in the book of Deuteronomy. So let's look first at the sanctity of our words. Numbers 30, verses 1 through 16.
Then Moses summoned the leaders of the tribes of Israel and told them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. A man who makes a vow to the Lord or makes a pledge under oath must never break it. He must do exactly what he said he would do. If a young woman makes a vow to the Lord or a pledge under oath while she is still living at her father's home, and her father hears of the vow or pledge and does not object to it, then all her vows and pledges will stand. But if her father refuses to let her fulfill the vow or pledge on the day he hears of it, then all her vows and pledges will become invalid. The Lord will forgive her because her father would not let her fulfill them. Now, suppose a young woman makes a vow or binds herself with an impulsive pledge and later marries. If her husband learns of her vow or pledge and does not object on the day he hears of it, her vows and pledges will stand. But if her husband refuses to accept her vow or impulsive pledge on the day he hears of it, he nullifies her commitments and the Lord will forgive her. If, however, a woman is a widow or is divorced, she must fulfill all her vows and pledges. But suppose a woman is married and living in her husband's home while she makes a vow or binds herself with a pledge. If her husband hears of it and does not object to it, her vow or pledge will stand. But if her husband refuses to accept it on the day he hears of it, her vow or pledge will be nullified, and the Lord will forgive her. So her husband may either confirm or nullify any vows or pledges he makes to deny herself. But if he does not object on the day he hears of it, then he is agreeing to all her vows and pledges. If he waits more than a day and then tries to nullify a vow or pledge, he will be punished for her guilt. These are the regulations the Lord gave Moses concerning relationships between a man and his wife, and between a father and a young daughter who still lives at home.
Okay, so Moses had already discussed vows in Leviticus 27 about let your yes be yes and your no be no. Here he focuses on personal vows and their relationship to the family authority. So more of a personal thing. It sounds almost like you're reading a law book the way it comes out. And let's take a step back and here think about what it's saying. It says that because if you want to have a society, it rests on being truthful to one another. Vows, which Wiersbe says are promises to do something, and oaths, which are promises to not do something, were sacred because the Israelites made them to God. The word vow, I mean, an oath means you're saying, in God's name, I swear to you, I will do this. Unkept promises not only were an offense to God because you gave it to God, but they also would tear apart society's fabric. Men had to keep their vows. For women, back in that society, vows might require a man's approval. Why do you think that would be? Well, I think that's because the man's going to be on the hook, because if a man is responsible for a woman, he's responsible. So he should have a say in whether he's going to keep that vow. But if it's a single woman, then it's the father who gets to decide. If he remains silent for a day, then the vow holds. Now, if he objects, then the vow does not. If the woman's engaged, then it's not the father anymore, it's the fiancé. Because an engagement in that day was like, it's the first stage of a marriage, really. You were as if you had a husband. If he objected to her vow, because he was going to have to live with it once they got married, he could cancel it. Now, if a woman was widowed or divorced, it's different because she's now responsible for herself. And if she makes a vow, she knows deep in her heart that she was going to have to keep it and she's going to have to live with the consequences. So it was binding. And that was the end of that. She was like a man in terms of that law. If she were married, it's like in being engaged. And again, if the husband's silent, the vow's binding. Now, if she made the vow and he revoked it, then it wasn't binding like the rest. If he later revoked it after he consented either explicitly by saying, yeah, I agree, or not saying anything, he bore the guilt of breaking the vow, and he had to offer a sin offering to God and pay the consequences to the society around him of not keeping that vow. See, these laws underscore the power of speech. Words bind us to God, even if we don't realize it. And broken promises, such as marriage vows or contracts or pledges, are going to tear apart society if you have a society like that. And just as we expect God to keep his word, he expects us to keep ours. Because when we keep our word, we become more holy, more like God. And that's how he wants us to become. Also essential is proper authority in the home, Wiersbe points out. All people, man or woman, are equal before God, but roles have responsibilities. Unwise, hasty commitments by a wife without counsel of her husband can lead to costly consequences. And I'll say, hasty decisions by a husband without consulting a wife I've learned has costly consequences sometimes. Now we move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 31. And we may, let's see, yes, this is a good chapter. We read as much as we can here.
Then the Lord said to Moses, on behalf of the people of Israel, take revenge on the Midianites for leading them into idolatry. After that, you will die and join your ancestors. So Moses said to the people, choose some men and arm them to fight the Lord's war of revenge against Midian. From each tribe of Israel, send 1,000 men into battle. So they chose 1,000 men from each tribe of Israel, a total of 12,000 men armed for battle. Then Moses sent them out, 1,000 men from each tribe, and Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, led them into battle. They carried along the holy objects of the sanctuary and the trumpets for sounding the charge. They attacked Midian as the Lord had commanded Moses, and they killed all the men. All 5 of the Midianite kings, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, died in the battle. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. Then the Israelite army captured the Midianite women and children and seized their cattle and flocks and all their wealth as plunder. They burned all the towns and villages where the Midianites had lived. After they had gathered the plunder and captives, both people and animals, they brought them all to Moses and Eleazar the priest, and to the whole community of Israel, which was camped on the plains of Moab beside the Jordan River across from Jericho. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the community went to meet them outside the camp. But Moses was furious with all the generals and captains who had returned from the battle. Why have you let all the women live? He demanded. These are the very ones who followed Balaam's advice and caused the people of Israel to rebel against the Lord at Mount Peor. They are the ones who caused the plague to strike the Lord's people. So kill all the boys and all the women who have had intercourse with a man. Only the young girls who are virgins may live. You may keep them for yourselves. And all of you who have killed anyone or touched a dead body must stay outside the camp for 7 days. You must purify yourselves and your captives on the 3rd and 7th days. Purify all your clothing too, and everything made of leather, goat hair, or wood. Then Eleazar the priest said to the men who were in the battle, the Lord has given Moses this legal requirement. Anything made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, tin, or lead, that is, all metals that do not burn, must be passed through fire in order to be made ceremonial pure. These metal objects must then be further purified with the water of purification, but everything that burns must be purified by the water alone. On the 7th day, you must wash your clothes and be purified. Then you may return to the camp. And the Lord said to Moses, you and Eleazar the priest and the family leaders of each tribe are to make a list of all the plunder taken in the battle, including the people and animals. Then divide the plunder into 2 parts and give half to the men who fought the battle and half to the rest of the people. From the army's portion, first give the Lord his share of the plunder, 1 of every 500 of the prisoners and of the cattle, donkeys, sheep, and goats. Give this share of the army's half to Eleazar the priest as an offering to the Lord. From the half that belongs to the people of Israel, take 1 of every 50 of the prisoners and of the cattle, donkeys, sheep, goats, and other animals. Give this share to the Levites who are in charge of maintaining the Lord's tabernacle. So Moses and Eleazar the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses. The plunder remaining from everything that fighting men had taken total 675,000 sheep and goats, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 virgin girls. Half of the plunder was given to the fighting men. It totaled 337,500 sheep and goats, of which 675 were the Lord's share.
We'll just skim through this.
Okay.
Yeah. So half of the plunder was given to the fighting men, and it included sheep and goats and cattle and donkeys and virgin girls. And Moses gave all the Lord's share to Eleazar the priest, just as the Lord had directed him. And then half of the plunder went to the people of Israel, and Moses separated it from the half of the fighting men. So it's half and half. It totaled 337,500 sheep and goats, and the same thing, cattle, donkeys, and virgin girls. And the half share given to the people, Moses took one in every 50. Maybe he took one in every 500 from the soldiers. Then all the generals and captains came to Moses and said, "We, your servants, have accounted for all the men who went to battle under our command. Not one of us is missing. So we are presenting the items of gold we captured as an offering to the Lord from our share of the plunder, armbands and bracelets, rings, earrings, and necklaces. This will purify our lives before him and make us right with him." So Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from all the military commanders, all kinds of jewelry and crafted objects, and all the gold that the generals and the captains presented as the gifts to the Lord weighed 420 pounds. All the fighting men had taken some of the plunder for themselves. So Moses and Eleazar the priests accepted the gifts from the generals and captains and brought the gold to the tabernacle as a reminder to the Lord that the people of Israel belonged to him. All right, so they had this big battle with Midian. Let's start out by getting your background on who were the Midianites. So I'm gonna do that by quoting some verses from all the way back to Genesis. And the first one is Genesis 25, 1 and 2. Abraham married another wife whose name was Keturah, and she gave birth to, gives a list, and one of them is Midian. And the next verse I'll quote is later in Genesis. So that's when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them. So the people that the brothers sold Joseph to were Midianite traders that they called Ishmaelites. Well, okay. We just learned that Keturah, Abraham's late wife, after Sarah had died, his name was Midian. He started the Midianites. We know that Ishmael is Isaac's brother, older brother, right? And that was Abraham's first son. So why does the Bible call the Ishmaelites Midianite traders? Well, what you can deduce from that is that we know from God's commands later that, well, the Ishmaelites and Midianites became nomads, wandering the ground. They weren't Isaac, they weren't the chosen one. They were brothers. Ishmael had to be a lot older than Midian because he was born so much later after Sarah died, but they were brothers. And eventually their descendants, since they're both nomads and relatives, they joined together apparently and became one group. And so when you hear Midian, think Ishmael descendants and think Keturah's descendants through Midian. Well, both the Ishmaelites and okay. So, and then another verse, okay, which is kind of surprising given what happens here, is that Moses fled from Pharaoh to live in the land of Midian. Now that happened when he killed the guy and Pharaoh wanted to kill Moses, the early Pharaoh. And he went to live, and of course, Jethro was a Midianite priest who believed in God, and he was Jethro's, the father of Moses' wife. Okay, and then a few weeks, a little bit later, we hear in Exodus 2, God says, attack the Midianites and destroy them because they assaulted you with deceit and tricked you into worshiping Baal of Peor. That was in Numbers 25. Last week we went through the whole Baal thing, right? So they go from being cousins to being somebody to destroy. Though Israel sinned with the Midianites by worshiping that Baal up on Mount Peor, Midian also bore guilt for being the ones who seduced them, especially the women. So even though they were Abraham's descendants, God finally had to judge them and get rid of that evil that they'd become. So we have the battle, as Ida read, and Israel obeyed God's command for the holy war. Joshua probably led the army with old zealous Phinehas. He's the one who stabbed a man and his concubine who was a Midianite who had come into the camp and brought that sin with him. Phinehas, that same one, is now leading the priests, carrying the ark and the trumpets ahead of them. God gave them a complete victory, called it complete. They killed many Midianites, including kings and Balaam, and Israel suffered no casualty, zero. They destroyed cities and claimed the land for themselves. And later the tribe of Reuben was going to occupy that land. And they had become so bad that the soldiers, they spared the Midianite women and children, which disobeyed God's command. He said, wipe them all out. So Moses he's seen that story before. And he was alarmed because this new sin might mean that they would be wandering around for another 40 years. And so he ordered the execution of all the males and the non-virgin women, and the remaining virgins then became servants. All who touched, and then another thing he commanded was that all who touched the dead had to be ritually cleansed. Even the spoils of the war underwent that purification. They had to put even the metals and things they got that wouldn't ruin under fire. So if we look at those spoils, okay, for the ones they didn't kill and it was that God wanted them to have, he divided it. Half to the soldiers, half to the community. Both groups gave a portion to the Lord. 1 out of 500 for the soldiers, 1 out of 50 for the people. So the soldiers got taxed less and then the people. These gifts totaled thousands of animals and captives, and they were to support the tabernacle. So real boost for the Levites, because and the priests, they were the ones who got to benefit from it. And the Midianite women probably helped the priests. For example, in 1 Samuel 22, rather, later on in the Bible, it says that Bezalel made the bronze wash basin and its bronze stand from bronze mirrors donated by the women who served at the entrance of the tabernacle. So they're still there. They may have been Midianite women. I imagine, priests and Levites weren't celibate. They weren't like a Catholic priest, so they probably married some of these Midianite women and integrated them into their society rather than the other way around, which had happened when they committed the sin. Well, it was a miracle that not one Israelite soldier died in the battle. Out of deep gratitude, the officers then gave the sanctuary over 400 pounds of gold. Now, it was a voluntary gift, and it mirrored another voluntary gift given way back in Exodus 30 for the census offering, and it was known as atonement money. Originally used back in Exodus, they used it for the tabernacle silver sockets. And they were both just acts of generosity to the Lord. It was thanks. It reflected love for God and not something that was a command or anything they had to do. Now we move on to the loyalty of people, the tribes to one another. And that's chapter 32, 1 through 42.
The tribes of Reuben and Gad owned vast numbers of livestock. So when they saw that the lands of Jazer and Gilead were ideally situated for their flocks and herds, they came to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the other leaders of the community. They said, "Notice the towns of Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elealeh, Sibmah, Nebo, and Beton. The Lord has conquered this whole area for the community of Israel, and it is ideally suited for all our livestock. If we have found favor with you, please let us have this land as our property instead of giving us land across the Jordan. Do you intend to stay here while your brothers go across and do all the fighting?" Moses asked the men of Gad and Reuben. "Why do you want to discourage the rest of the people of Israel from going across the land the Lord has given them? Your ancestors did the same thing when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. After they went up to the valley of Eshcol and explored the land, they discouraged the people of Israel from entering the land that the Lord was giving them. Then the Lord was very angry with them, and he vowed, of all those I rescued from Egypt, no one who is 20 years old or older will ever see the land I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they have not obeyed me wholeheartedly. The only exceptions are Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they have wholeheartedly followed the Lord. The Lord was angry with Israel and made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years until the entire generation that sinned in the Lord's sight had died. But here you are a brood of sinners doing exactly the same thing. You are making the Lord even angrier with Israel. If you turn away from him like this and he abandons them again in the wilderness, you will be responsible for destroying this nation, this entire nation." But they approached Moses and said, "We simply want to build pens for our livestock and fortified towns for our wives and children. Then we will arm ourselves and lead our fellow Israelites into battle until we have brought them safely to their land. Meanwhile, our families will stay in the fortified towns we build here, so they will be safe from any attacks by the local people. We will not return to our homes until all the people of Israel have received their portion of land, but we do not claim any of the land on the other side of the Jordan. We would rather live here on the east side and accept this as our grant of land." Then Moses said, "If you keep your word and arm yourselves for the Lord's battles, and if your troops cross the Jordan and keep fighting until the Lord has driven out his enemies, then you may return when the Lord has conquered the land. You will have fulfilled your duty to the Lord and to the rest of the people of Israel, and the land on the east side of the Jordan will be your property from the Lord. But if you fail to keep your word, then you will have sinned against the Lord, and you may be sure that your sin will find you out. Go ahead and build towns for your families and pens for your flocks, but do everything you have promised." Then the men of Gad and Reuben replied, "We, your servants, will follow your instructions exactly. Our children, wives, flocks, and cattle will stay here in the towns of Gilead, but all who are able to bear arms will cross over to fight for the Lord, just as you have said." So Moses gave orders to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the leaders of the clans of Israel. He said, "The men of Gad and Reuben who are armed for battle must cross the Jordan with you to fight for the Lord. If they do, give them the land of Gilead as their property when the land is conquered. But if they refuse to arm themselves and cross over with you, then they must accept the land with the rest of you in the land of Canaan." The tribes of Gad and Reuben said again, "We are your servants, and we will do as the Lord has commanded. We will cross the Jordan into Canaan fully armed to fight for the Lord, but our property will be here on this side of the Jordan." So Moses assigned land to the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph. He gave them the territory of King Sihon of the Amorites and the land of King Og of Bashan, the whole land with its cities and surrounding lands.
Okay, we'll stop there. Because it starts talking about descendants of each one and the towns they built over there on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, and the main thing to take away is that pulling back a level, as I said before, a community thrives on integrity, on trust in God, and on loyalty to one another. You might call it biblical patriotism. So let's go through these verses now. The first thing that happened was they made this request. The tribe of Reuben and Gad, and they had large herds for some reason, and they asked to settle on the east side of Jordan. That wasn't part of God's original plan. It was going to be from the Jordan to the west. Because they liked the land, they just conquered the people already, and it was, they wanted to settle there. Later, the half-tribe of Manasseh joined in and did the same thing. Though this land is separated from Canaan by the Jordan River, God had essentially given it to Israel, and now these guys sought permission to be the tribes in Israel who got possession of it. Moses' reaction was initially he was angry because it looked like they were trying to get out of fighting on the other side of the Jordan. We're just gonna stay here. You guys go ahead. Because he'd seen this story before at Kadesh. Remember, he warned back then they went over and looked at the promised land, came back, and all those spies scared the people and they didn't want to go. So he warned that if these guys don't want to go again, that it could bring God's judgment again. Remember what happened last time? They wandered around for 40 years. Well, their defense, he came back and said, whoa, you got this wrong. We just want to get things set up a little bit over here, and then we're gonna lead you guys into the promised land and be at the front fighting for our brothers. So Moses agreed to that, but he warned that be sure your sin will find you out if you don't. Failure to help conquer that land would be a sin, and Moses involved Eleazar, the new priest, Joshua, Moses' successor, and then all the new tribal leaders to ensure they kept that promise. This is the new generation, right? And they did in the end fulfill their promise. Let's look at Joshua 22, 1 through 2. Then Joshua called together the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. He told them, "You have done as Moses, the servant of your Lord, commanded you, and you have obeyed every order I have given you." And then he let them go back. The sovereignty of God is the next topic, and it's Numbers 33, 1 through 49. Let me summarize this. It's remembering Israel's journey. It's like a big map he describes. Says this is the route the Israelites followed as they marched out of Egypt under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. At the Lord's direction, Moses kept a written record of their progress. These are the stages of their march identified by the different places where they stopped along the way. They set out from the city of Ramesses, okay, and talks about that, right, about the Passover, reminds them of that. And then it goes through, after leaving Ramesses, the Israelites set up camp in Succoth. After Succoth, Etham, and so forth. We don't know where some of these places are because they're probably, some of them were probably just camps. And some say they camped at a camp in the wilderness of sin. Anyway, as we go through all these verses, we come at finally at the end, they get to Kadesh, camped at Mount Hor, border of Edom. Well, and Aaron the priest was directed by the Lord to go up the mountain. There he died. So it reminds them that it was Aaron died there. And then the whole thing about the fighting and the people, and then they went to a bunch of other places and all that, all the things we've already read. And I skipped over that because we're going to have another lesson next week that's going to summarize the whole book. So we'll get to it then too. So what do we see here? Well, the Lord commanded, as it said, Moses, keep a list of the places Israel camped during their wilderness journey. And that's this list. And it's 40 places, starting in Ramses in Egypt and ending on the plains of Moab, across from Jericho, right on the cusp of the promised land. So it summarizes this exodus, the wilderness wanderings, and the arrival near Canaan to remind them of their past. It's more than a travelogue. It testifies to the Lord's sovereign guidance. History is really his story. He's in control. God not only writes history, he plans it and ensures its execution. When Israel refused his rule, he overruled. They lost blessing, but his purpose prevailed. The older generation completely died out during this march, and a new one rose up. Miriam died at Kadesh. Someone else had to lead the choir. Aaron died at Mount Hor, and Eleazar became the new high priest. That was his son. Before his death, Moses appointed Joshua as his successor. Despite all these transitions, God remained unchanged. Psalm 90, verse 1 says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. He's unchanged. God's sovereignty doesn't cancel human responsibility. This is that thing we can't understand. God's sovereignty invites active participation in his plan. Knowing God rules does not produce passivity on our part. Okay, God's going to do it all. No, it should inspire courageous obedience to him, confident prayer, and perseverance in our trials. Because God calls believers to obey and trust him, even when the circumstances don't make sense. But God is in control. Our efforts, faith, and obedience matter deeply in his unfolding plan. We can't understand how he can both permit us to have free choice, free will, and also always have his plans come to pass. Because if we make a choice that's not in his plan, Didn't we mess up his plan? No. Paul wrote about this thing. We can't understand how that can happen. Right? He says, how unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. We just have to accept it that, yeah, it all fits together somehow. He takes every mistake we make and turns it into something that fits right into his plan again. And no matter what's going on, that car always steers back to the right direction. Okay, let's move to the next verses. That's 33:50 through 35:54. And that's a lot of summarizing that was 33:50 through 35:34. So we're going to go through this. It says, while they were camped near the Jordan River on the plains of Moab opposite Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you must drive out all the people living there. You must destroy all their carved and molten images and demolish their pagan shrines. Take possession of the land and settle in it, because I have given it to you to be what you occupy. You must distribute the land among the clans by sacred lot in proportion to their size. The larger portion of land will be allotted to each of the larger clans, and a smaller portion allotted to the smaller clans. The decision of the sacred lot is final. In this way, the portions of land will be divided among your ancestral tribes. But if you don't drive out the people who live in the land, those who remain will be like splinters in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will harass you in the land where you live, and I will do to you what I had planned to do to them. Then the next chapter 34 is about the boundaries, and I'm going to go through that. It's just describing the boundary in words. And then briefly, the southern border is mainly dictated by this little gully that they call the Wadi, or the brook of Egypt. It goes from about the middle of the land there, the top of the mountains, down to the Mediterranean Sea. So that's the southern boundary. The western boundary is the Mediterranean Sea. Then there is a boundary for the north, and then the western boundary is the Jordan River, so valley. So that's how that's divided. And then they divide up the land. And the Lord said to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and Joshua son of Nun, and all the men designated to divide the grants of land among the people, he said to them, enlist one leader from each tribe to help them with the task. And then it gives all the tribal leaders. They did this, gave all the tribal leaders a list of the tribal leaders once before. They were the ones who were responsible for doing the original counting for the first generation. So these are all, except for Caleb and Joshua, they're all new people, because the other ones are gone. And then it starts talking about towns for Levites, and so all of the different places the Levites are going to live. So we're going to walk through that in the interest of time, rather than reading all of those descriptions. We're going to summarize it. One thing to point out is that in these verses, the land of Canaan appears 16 times, emphasizing God's promise that Israel indeed would enter that land and conquer and inherit it. Despite delays, 40 years wandering in the wilderness, God's plan stood firm, because he didn't say if you cross the Jordan River, he says when you cross the Jordan River. Let's look first at its inhabitants. Israel was to fully conquer and dispossess the pagan nations, destroying their altars and their idols along the way. This judgment was just to destroy them completely. because he'd given them so many chances. And in the process, it cleared the way for a new nation to establish itself that was going to glorify God, foreshadow Jesus Christ, and be a blessing for all the other nations. This was a necessary thing that had to occur. If they'd left the pagans there and the shrines undestroyed, it would not have occurred. That would tempt the people of Israel too much. Well, sadly, they failed to obey completely, and they suffered greatly for it. And they did have splinters in their eyes and thorns in their sides as a result. Okay, let's look at the boundaries. I have a little. Well, I have that at the front, this little map here of all of the tribes. They didn't have any modern survey methods, but the people defined the borders by landmarks, and sometimes they were big old trees, which too bad they're not here today. So he outlined all four sides, south, west, north, and east, as I said. He noted the land given to the Transjordan tribes. And he said it ends at the Jordan River. Okay, you guys want some of that land on this side, so be it. And he gave them much, a lot of land. Israel never claimed all of it. Pagan cities remained to the end and undermined the blessing that God intended, especially over there in the land where the Philistines were along the coast. They were a big problem for them, and they never could get that coast tackled. They were good for fighting in the mountains, but when it came down on the coast with the chariots and everything, the Israelites weren't so good. Just as ancient Israel left some enemies in the land, believers today often leave unchallenged strongholds in our lives, areas of disobedience, of compromise. The call still remains. Let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. That's out of Hebrews 4, verse 11. So then he told them how to divide the land up, and we'll get more into that in the next book. And then he talks about the cities. After that conquest, Israel renamed the cities, set aside 48 for the Levites and 6 as cities of refuge. We go back to that. And on this map, very quickly, all of the cities are listed here in black. It's too small for you to really see it, but you can see they're all scattered all through Israel. And then 6 of them are flagged as cities of refuge, 3 on the west side of the Jordan and 3 on the east side. And it wasn't so much as population, but as geographically arranged so that no one would be too far from the city of refuge. We talked about this, but they protected the accused from manslaughter, those accused of manslaughter rather, during the trial to find out if they're innocent or not, because the elders of the city that of refuge where they fled would examine the case, and if they were declared innocent, they could remain under protection until the high priest's death. But if they were found guilty, the victim's relatives were the ones who were supposed to execute them. They didn't have, policemen like we do today. They don't have such a formal process. It was just understood that the victim's family was going to take care of the problem. So, and they were supposed to kill them because the blood of innocent victims polluted that land. And since the land belonged to the Lord, the people had to cleanse it by killing the guilty person. In those days, a murderer fled to a city of refuge. Today, a sinner runs to our city of refuge, which is Christ. And he provides, though, an eternal refuge. That refuge that the murderers fled to ended when the priest at that city died. But Jesus is there for us forever, and he intercedes for us continually, securing our salvation and ensuring that we are never without hope. His advocacy at the Father's right hand guarantees that no accusation will stand against us. Through him, we find justice, mercy, cleansing, restoration. God perfectly balances mercy and justice. You know, those are two very different things, attributes of God. Justice says, kill them. Mercy says, spare them. But he balances that to enact his redemptive plan. He bore the punishment. He's the one that we killed. So now there's no condemnation for us. In summary, in this lesson, we studied Numbers 30 through 35, 6 verses, and chapters rather, and we learned about a lot of things. We learned the sanctity of our words, that how important our word, keeping our word is, the victory of faith, that in God, you have faith in God, you will have victory, whether it's the enemies that they faced or your own enemies, like the devil trying to tempt you. We learned about the loyalty of the people to one another, how important it is for us to be loyal to each other. We learned about the sovereignty of God. No matter what, God's plan goes forward. And we learned about the certainty of, they learned about the certainty of their inheritance through this. When you cross the Jordan, and we know of ours too, when we cross our Jordan to the new heaven and earth, it's a certainty. Next week, like I said, it's going to be a retrospective of the entire book of Numbers, and we're going to focus on what it's taught us about life, about God, about ourselves, about faith, and the importance of each individual believer, as we were just talking about. And with that, I will close this down. And we finished a little late, but I'm glad we were able to get through this long session and finish it. I'll go ahead and stop the share. Any quick comments before we end the session?
That was another long one. It just reinforces, God's commitment to the Israelites.
Yeah, and to us. Yeah. Thank you, Ida. You got through all the reading. Tried to help a little bit.
Helped.
Okay, well.
So Moses hasn't died yet?
Yeah, no, he hangs on. And he doesn't die for a while because there's another whole book of the Bible. Moses is going to be around. It's called Deuteronomy. It's going to be a second telling of all this, and he's going to again reinforce and teach the people how to be, what they need to know to be able to cross over that promised land and succeed rather than fail. Yeah. So
This is very, very mind-boggling.
yes, it is. But everybody's saying he's about to die, and he keeps on going, and so
We know that he's not allowed to go.
he's not.
But to this day, I understand they have never discovered where Moses is buried. I think God doesn't want those people to know.
No, I don't think so. Nobody knows where he was buried. But yeah, you said he never got to go over. Actually, you find it in the New Testament. He did.
He did?
Yeah, because remember when Jesus had the ascension, and suddenly Peter and James and John were with him, and they looked, and there was Jesus he was white and shining, and also with him were whom? Elijah and Moses, and I
Well,
believe
they were because they were too much.
Abraham.
Right.
That-
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, he wanted to build booths for them, so there he was. He was back alive again. I don't know. You could say it was his spirit. But at least in his first life, you're right. He never made it over.
Well. Okay, thanks.
Yes, that's probably confused me more than hell. But any other comments? Yeah,
Lot to take in.
it is. Tell Jenna we'll be praying for her surgery, gallbladder.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, let's
Tell Jen he said it was a piece of cake.
there we go. Did you hear that?
No,
He said, Jeannie said, tell Jenna that Miss Jeannie said it was a piece of cake.
okay.
We will tell her that.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and I'll stop the recording. We'll end in a prayer.